Hello, hello, happy Monday, and welcome to another episode 114 of Electricpreneur Secrets, the Electricians Podcast. Me and Joe have been coming here for about, 6.5 months, live for
Mm.
you guys through all the fancy shit away to just get behind the windshield of the van with you to help you master sales, simplify pricing, and deliver premium level electrical service. Joseph, how are you doing today?
Man, today was one of those ones where it was just, it didn't start right, but it's ending great. And I'm keeping that positive momentum going.
Is it okay to talk about what happened to you this morning?
Oh, yeah, I'd be happy to. We had a situation where while taking the girls to daycare, we got T-boned by someone who just hit us from the side. Luckily, we invested in a good car with good safety ratings. So their car was totaled. Our car is dented to shit, but it's drivable, which is good. The girls are safe. Mel is safe. But the funny thing was, is the person was like, I was only going 2 to 5 miles an hour. You guys just came up the street like crazy, even though we had complete right of way and it was a side road. So I couldn't have been going more than 20 miles an hour. And for her car to be totaled, that wouldn't have happened at 2 miles an hour.
Okay, well, I'm glad you guys are safe.
Thank you for
I know
that.
when you first told me that, the only reason you guys are driving around because you both work from home, right? The
Yeah.
only reason is to go to daycare.
Yep. Pretty much.
It's like, what the hell? And then you said T-bone. I was actually really scared for a moment when you said that, just
Mhm.
thinking, for kids, that's never an easy experience to go through.
Yeah, luckily they hit my side. And I'm so glad that it hit my side. And I don't know if this is just a machismo thing, but it's like if it comes to my family, I would love to suffer on their behalf. If there was anything that could have ever happened, I want it to happen to me. My
Right.
wife is my angel. My two kids are my entire world. I would take any pain if it meant that they didn't have to go through any of it. So I'm really happy they hit me and my side instead.
So in the back, aren't they split up?
They are.
Are you driving, by the way? I always picture Mel driving for some reason.
Mel's a driver. I'm not much of a driver if I can help it.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're okay, and I'm sorry about the maybe what am I looking for? The debate over whose fault it is over there in the land of lawsuits, the U.S. of
Mm.
A.
Yeah, it's gonna be pretty obvious. I mean, like you just show the pictures and you're like, yeah, there's no way that we could have caused this.
Tough stuff. Tough stuff. Well,
Mhm.
thanks for sharing, Joe. Otherwise, I hope that you're able to regroup and make an awesome Monday. I know that's not the
Mhm.
easiest thing. I mean, I can just imagine coffee in hand, everything's going great Monday morning. Yeah, maybe on edge already. Slam. Yeah,
But the
that's a
thing
problem.
is, there's actually a positive spin that we can take to this,
All
right?
right.
We can't control the things that happen to us, but
Mm-hmm.
we can control the way that we react to them. Now, obviously, my first instinct is to blow up and get angry, but that actually doesn't solve anything. I focus on the things that we can control. My wife is safe. My kids are safe. My car is drivable. And insurance is going to take care of it eventually. And I'm here working with one of my best friends, serving a community of electricians that I really feel like we can help. There's purpose in my day. And that's what I'm going to choose to focus on.
Nice spin. Nice spin. And even with all that calm that you just brought to that situation, I still can't help but imagine if you had a sword in the car and that happened and you got out and ran your sword routine, would that lady get out and run?
Let's just put it to you this way. In the US of A, we don't carry swords, we carry other things. And
Right.
it was one of those situations where I wasn't worried.
All right. All right. Fair enough. Okay, guys, we're going to jump right into this. If you're with us live in the Facebook community group, please feel free to say hello. It's Monday. Would love to hear about your weekend. Would love to hear about your wins, your challenges, any options, objections, or other that you would like help with today. We're going to be right here discussing a very important topic. This concept of installers versus salesmen versus
Hmm.
service technicians.
Hmm.
And it's kind of a common thing actually, and a common misconception. I feel like there's maybe some areas of misunderstanding around this,
Hmm.
and really a lot of leverage and some important stuff. So we really wanted to shed some light in that today.
Hmm.
So first and foremost, I think it's kind of obvious maybe to even say this, but I like having installers first in this title because it might be the easier electrician to hire. Would you
Mhm.
agree with that, Joe?
So the logic therein is that you can hire someone for skill, and it's likely going to be an installer position. I still recommend hiring for character and training skill, but the easiest to hire would be an installer. The reason being is that they need to have minimal level of customer service that could be trained in-house, but you want your journeyed person, your master, your foreman, your apprentices. Those are the categories that we're talking in this particular section.
Right, right. And so even the training for an install
Mhm.
tech could be a lot simpler. In fact, we were talking a bit about it this morning and that
Yeah.
whole transition of sale to work order
Mhm.
and helping someone to understand that and perform at the highest level, or at least the standard of quality that you come to expect at
Mhm.
Service Loop Electrical, at other electrical, whatever your business name is.
Mhm.
So, with that said, there seems to be a lot more control over and a little maybe easier even supervision
Mhm.
and checkpoints with just an installer tech.
Correct. So a lot of times that comes down to we can do two things. We can talk about the training that goes into it, and then we can also talk about how the work orders are going to be established so that they can succeed at the highest level.
Right,
Right.
right.
So the first thing is, and I want to speak to all the electrical owners out there. If you've ever been frustrated and said, well, why didn't they think of this? Or how did they think this would look good? I mean, we've all been there. We're licensed electricians who've been in the field for about a decade, 2 decades, whatever, how long you've been in there. You've been doing the same job for so long that it's supposed to be common sense. Now, based on our last exercise and our last podcast, we realized common sense doesn't exist unless it's trained.
Mm,
So the thing is, with an installer, if they do something wrong, the question comes down to how did I allow this situation to happen? There are no bad students, there are only bad teachers.
love
So,
that.
how did I allow this situation to happen? One of the first gaps that people often do is that they'll have maybe 1 day of training and then they'll just expect them to handle every situation perfect. What I'd recommend doing is actually having an install manual. If you have a job that you feel was done correctly, like they open up the panel and every line is perfect, every breaker is set, all the grounds are braided perfectly, you got the neutrals in a French braid. You know what I'm talking about. Things are perfect.
Yeah.
Take a picture of it and say, this is the standard. When you're done with your job, I want you to hold this next to the panel and see, is this what it looks like? If it's not, we now have a metric to go by because I, one, showed you how to do it. I then verbally instructed you how to do it. And then I provided you an installation manual with step-by-step pictures of what the finished product is supposed to look like. So it makes accountability way easier. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. And now, with reference to the sales tech, the next person in this
Mm-hmm.
formula, or the salesperson, even,
Mm-hmm.
what would you say the key differences are between those positions and even the different strengths that each would need?
Really, it comes down to the mindset. Like you actually have to operate in different mental places in order to succeed in either category. Can I touch on that if that's okay?
Absolutely. Jump right
All
in.
right. So an installer usually has a strictly logical problem solving mentality, right? Okay, we're called out to solve this task. I'm cutting in recess lights in living room. My role is the first thing is basic conversation with customer, let them know not to come near this room, and they start working, tarping furniture, tarping chairs, putting out the lasers, leveling everything up. They're thinking of work.
Hmm.
That's all they're thinking about. And I wouldn't blame them because that's what they're being paid to do. So they can stay in that logical, literal mentality and thrive in their job. But let's say, sake of argument, and I can say this from experience and I'll explain why. Let's say you had an installer who is a sole proprietor business owner. He spent all day grinding out jobs. 8 hours a day was a job, 6 hours a day was a job, and then has to go and sell a job or has to quote a job. Sales mentality is very different. To think of a sales mentality, you're not thinking of end result. You're thinking of customer's emotional use in the situation. You're thinking of solution based. You're like, how does this product solve this particular emotional need? It's very different, the two mentalities. One is strictly literal code and logic. Here's what the work order says. Here's what I'm following. And the other has to operate in an abstract, which is, I don't know what we're going to run into, but I'm going to learn about you, a person, and I'm going to build solutions around what I feel you as a person need.
And you know what? As you say that, I'm picturing so many of our electricians that we talk to on a daily basis where they do have troubles coming up with options that are based around the emotions and the quality of life of a homeowner, right?
And
or where they do find themselves pre-diagnosing on the way, where they do find themselves so stuck in a price book and using that pre-diagnosis and actually even coming up with the presented choice of options before they even arrive and get to know someone. And just the way you said that, it actually helps me bridge that back to exactly as you described. Maybe that's just the sole proprietor with the installer mindset still.
And I suffered from that too. I remember when I first started business, it was just me and my partner, and we had to do everything. So it was like, if I sold the job, we were then doing the job, which meant that we also then had to run the business and then get the material and then market it. So like, there were so many hats going on. But where I found that I was really struggling was, all right, I sold the job yesterday. We're going to do the job today. I'm going to leave at 5 so that I can go run sales calls until 7. And then I'm going to go home and do work orders till 9 so that we then can do the job again at set. So my mentality was constantly shifting. And because it was always shifting, it was like the mentality of, how do you like to say it? Man who chases 2 rabbits catches none.
Yeah, chasing 2 rabbits, catch none. That's right. Yep.
Yeah. So like the thing is I would be trying to do the best install I could, because I was in sales mentality, I couldn't get it dialed in. After 8 hours, I would be solely in install mode. And then I would go to sales calls and I wouldn't sell the way I was supposed to because I just spent 8 hours thinking about turning tools.
And that's an awesome segue if I can jump in, because that actually brings us to the third position title. And I think honestly, the origins of it, the all-around generalist service tech. But now, as you're describing, there's very different mindsets and really a different operational attitude, because one's kind of logic based and install. The next is really emotional and emotional intelligence based in sales. But then there's the service tech, where many companies are running 3, 4, 5, maybe a dozen all-rounded service techs who are running their own calls, scheduling their own opportunities, and coming back to install them as well. But there's some limitations there. I really wanted to jump in on that with you today.
Sure, be happy to. So, have you ever heard the expression, jack of all trades but master of none?
Yes, I have. Apparently, there's a continuation to that too.
There is.
I can never remember the second part.
Okay, that was actually what I was going to talk about. It's a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes better than a master of one. So the rule is this: if you had an installer versus service tech doing install, the installer will win. That it's just going to happen. Like if you're telling me that you've been doing install for 10 years, the same jobs, there isn't a chance in hell I'm going to be able to run laps around you. I can't do it. It's not going to happen. On the other hand, you have the service tech going against a salesperson and saying, oh, okay, we're both going to sell. The salesperson is going to blow him out of the water because all he does, eats, sleeps, and breathes is sales. But where the service tech thrives is when you needed a more consolidated position, because the service tech could go to a call, and this is very similar to my previous position. You could go to a call, diagnose it from a literal mentality, but keep the mentality of I'm trying to serve the client, then sell the job and be able to set it up to where you're able to stay for an hour or 2 hours to get the job at least up and running for your install team to follow behind you. That's where service techs thrive, because you can train them to do a little bit of both. They may not master each category like a specialist would, but you can have a very well-rounded technician. And through those technicians, you can build very scalable companies.
Yeah, 100%. And now, from what you said earlier, and even just
Mhm.
now, it seems so intuitive. It's easy to acknowledge that, yes, if one person spends all their time on one set of skills, they'll achieve mastery quicker and
Correct.
they'll have it more consistently.
Naturally.
So I wonder if that service tech position and the reason we get stuck in that in so many companies is based on that's how the owner did it. And now they're just
That's
teaching exactly what they did because that's what they know. And so it's just a
Mhm.
perpetual thing, not recognizing or not having the strengths and systems in place to recognize who should ultimately bridge over to become your top salespeople and who should
Mhm.
ultimately bridge back and focus on installations. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts?
I do, but it also brings back another thought. Like occasionally we hear that a business owner will come to us and be like, I don't know how to price my guys correctly because it takes me this long to do a job, but it takes them this much longer to do it. And I don't know if they're just not hustling or if they don't know what's going on. Now, if you're in the background and you're listening to it and you're like, yeah, it's me, it's very likely that because either you started as a specialist and transitioned at a necessity and now expect your team to have that same level of depth of experience without the training that you had. That's the biggest gap. You yourself have been trained through the school of hard knocks over the past 20 years. But what about your team? Were they truly educated to the level that they needed to be so they could thrive in each category?
Wow. Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. And so just to be clear and clearly state the case here, do you believe a team is better comprised of specialist installers and sales versus generalist service techs who are trying to do a little bit too much of everything?
I believe that going with specialists is key. That's how we originally set up our company, and I can explain why the reasoning of it was. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, do it.
Okay. So when we had installers, we had one area to train them on. Well, technically two, but we can explain the reasons why. Obviously, customer service is prevalent in everything. Every position, I don't care if you were sweeping the shop floor, you had customer service training. Because if a customer walks into the door, you need to know how to greet them properly so that they want to come back, right?
Hmm.
So everyone had customer service training. But when you're working with an install team, you now know specifically what they're going to be working on. And you, as the salesperson, can actually design what trainings need to happen. Because if you think about it, let's say, here's a good example: Nest thermostats. Very few electricians ever work on them. The reason being is because there's a common wire that needs to be installed that prevents the condenser from cycling on a consistent basis, right? But if you weren't trained on that, there would be no reason why you would take the time to run it, and therefore you would have a warranty in the future. It wouldn't say that in the install manual. You would have to physically know it through product training.
Right. Yeah.
So let's say I sell a Nest thermostat common wire rewire, right? Do I want to get it set up so your condenser stops cycling? What I could do is I would now know and look at our install training manuals. Is there anything in place on common wire installs? If there's
Mhm.
not, you'd mark it down and say, this is an area that needs to be covered by this date.
Right.
So the salesperson with access to the install manual can say, does my team know how to do this? If they don't know how to do this, this is a sign that we need to train it. If we don't train it, they can't deliver it. If they don't deliver it, I won't get more sales in the future because I'll have dissatisfied customers.
I
So
like that.
each team actually is connected in a loop. Same with the installers. If the installers go to a job and they say, listen, the sales guy didn't know what he was talking about because we went out there and we found out that he missed a major component. Now the salesperson needs to understand the technical training because you can't sell something if you don't understand it.
Yep.
So by having the two teams as specialists be in coordination with each other, you're able to find that the team works more cohesively. And as a result, they actually operate at a higher level.
Absolutely. I love that. And I'm reminded of that common vision of a relay race.
Mm-hmm.
The baton, in this case, is that instruction, that manual,
Correct.
that install guide. Both need it and both exchange it, and that's where their duties either end or begin.
Mhm.
That's awesome. Really good. So help us out with this, Joe. How would you recognize then if your installer is more than an installer? And in
Mhm.
fact, here's another question. Would all hired electricians start as installers in your business and get trained up from there? Or is there such thing as hiring a sales technician?
Personally, I believe that everyone needs to rise the ranks. And the reason being is this: you can get the best salesman in the industry. Let's say, sake of argument, you find your goat. Like, this guy can sell anything. It's not enough that he can sell it. He has to sell what you're delivering. So even if he's not an installer, he should be with the installers. He should see the meetings. He should be able to communicate with them. He should ride with them, even if he serves a couple of weeks as a helper, because you need to understand how we do the job.
Yes.
Until you physically see why our way is drastically superior to our competition, you will not be able to sell at the level that you need. That's why owner, technician, salespeople like myself were able to sell at such a high ratio, because one, I knew the job needed to be done, and it was our method. So it was like, I did it. I know what we're supposed to do. But then in addition to it, it was like, you know what? If we could sell it and you can do it and you can train it, you're in a position to help your team the right way.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And the way you put that is really this, we're implying a very real thing here. Your business needs to first master that bottom floor before we build up from that. And that first floor is filled with basically your pricing, your marketing, and your sales. If you get those things dialed in and into a process, then you can train people on it, right? Imagine that first floor, all that sales stuff is just automatic almost. All we got to do is meet for training once, twice, 3 times a week, whatever your regiment is, and keep it going. Keep coaching your people. Just focus on that HR development, knowing that that process serves you already. Knowing that when you leave the scene for a bit, for a week off or whatever, your people can sell for you. And knowing that, I love and follow this logic of absolutely put people in the install, get to know that whole program, even if they're not meant to stay there. Please.
Exactly. I was actually going to speak almost at a devil's advocate here and say that there's one scenario where this cross training actually really, really helps.
Okay.
So I had a situation where before we were training our installers how to do better customer service, I remember I went on a job and we sold a massive renovation, changing all the switches, adding lights, fans. Like, it was a pretty significant project. And I brought my team to the speed with the work orders, and I was like, this is what you're doing. And they said, sure, this is what we're doing. Got it. Understood. Check mark, done. The thing is that the customer approached the technician and so approached the installer and was like, hey, did I really need this done? And he was like, well, I don't really know if you needed it done or not, but that's what it said on the work order. So that's what we're going to do. Can you believe me when I said the customer left us very intense voicemails and emails later saying, like, did you sell me something I didn't need? I asked your installer. They said they didn't even know if he needed it or not. The biggest problem with that is this: it's not enough to just specialize 100%. You need to have an understanding of what the other person is trying to do.
Yeah.
And if we can touch on the work order process, I think that would really bridge the gap.
Sure.
Would that be
Let's
fair?
do it. Yep.
Okay. So the way that we bridged the gap is where I went wrong on that call was he didn't understand the why. The why we were doing it was because they had a previous dimmer there, and that dimmer was non-compatible with the lights that she currently had. And when she dimmed the dimmer down to a quarter, the lights would strobe, and her family had sensory needs, which meant that with strobing lights, it was going to be a problem.
Yikes.
I recognized that because being on the spectrum myself, I knew those sensory needs were going to come back up. I didn't communicate that to the team. So they saw, well, it's a brand new dimmer. It looks like you got some brand new things. They must have had a reason, but it just wasn't communicated to us. So the customer didn't feel warm and fuzzy about it.
Yeah.
So what we did to fix that was we changed how our work orders are listed. there were two separate categories. What we would do is we would first draw a map of the room or draw a map of the property.
Yep.
Didn't have to be fancy, but what we would do is we would color code the work. So like red was install, green was point of attention. So we would have each point and then we'd label it like as like number 1, number 2, number 3, and that would correspond to a work order. So you would see, oh, wait, number 1 looks like a meter, looks like a panel, looks like we're doing a change. Let's go to the work order. The first line is what you were physically doing, right? You're changing your 100 amp to a 200 amp, 45 space, 60 QO series panel. Why are we doing it? And this is what really the superpower came from. The reason why was because the customer had mentioned that they were planning on getting a Tesla and they wanted to make sure they had the additional power, even though their home does not require a 200 amp. Could you imagine if the technician was asked, hey, do you think I needed this whole 200 amp panel? I mean, my whole house is on natural gas. I got 4 breakers.
Yeah. Without the why, absolute train wreck. Yeah. I mean, if we're selling on the whys and that desired quality of life, then the install team's got to know that.
Exactly. So it really, really helps to make sure that if you're going to have that separation, that it's not a true separation. There should always be an interpersonal connection.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I love that. So how would you go about then, just as sort of a final segue to this one, how would you go about recognizing when that installer is maybe ready for a sales position, is ready for growth? Maybe you just recognize that the qualities or their interests have developed. But do you have some sort of rules of thumb or thoughts there, Joe?
Yeah, I can help you with that. So realistically, we would promote based on feedback from customers. So like everyone's going to have that installer, and I'm sure you have it as well. Like if you're listening to this, you've got that guy where he's always getting reviews. Wow, Glenn was great. Brian was great. Mark was great. This guy went above and beyond. He even had the floor protectors on. He was friendly. He showed me everything. That's a sign. Customer service can be trained, but it's very rarely innate.
Yeah.
When you find someone who has had minimal training and is thriving at a level where customers are writing 5-star reviews, that's an indicator that that person could perform at a higher level. A transition would be bringing that person into a service tech role and saying, great, you have technical understanding. Let's let you keep doing work. You have the ability of now selling and building relationships. You can receive bonuses from that work. And then when you're fully ready to transition, your next level of career is put down the tools and strictly get into sales.
I love that.
So
Great
it's a
roadmap.
path of saying you can work with us until your body has gotten to the point where you don't want to be in the field all day.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a career path rather than just a job path.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And what do you think though also about, would you just start someone and say demand calls, or just have one person that sells demand calls only, serves demand calls, and then leave the opportunity calls for a sales specialist?
That I would recommend, and I can explain why. So the demand call process is like the level 1 process. You're going into the call with them saying, yes, I want something fixed. I called you because I have that not working and I want it done today. It's pretty much, that's your call to lose. Yeah. We're going to make it easier for you, but they already need you. They want you there, and they wouldn't have called you and taken time out if they weren't at least committed. On an opportunity call, it's different. I've gone to calls where they're like, hey, I want to get a generator installed. Meet me at this location. And I show up and there's no house there. They're like, well, yeah, well, we're planning on getting a generator. Here's the plans. It's nice to know how to handle those situations so that you're not just throwing it away. And instead you're like, okay, if they do give me a curveball, they do say I'm just budget shopping, they do say I'm not doing this for 6 months, you're prepared with all the subtle and variable tools that you can use to still build the relationship and bring the deal to a conclusion.
I love that. Really good feedback. Joe, is there anything else we missed on this one?
Not off top of mind, but I'm pretty sure about 5 minutes is going to pass and we're going to say, we need to make another episode on this.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we could. There's a ton to dive into here. Do you have any action items in mind, or an all-star action in mind, or which would you prefer to take today?
I would say I can just fire off whichever. We can determine whether it's an all-star or an action. Is that fair?
All right. Yeah. Throw us in action then.
Okay. So the bare minimum action that I would recommend is if you don't have a team right now, knowing what position you're looking to hire for is very important. The reason being is that sometimes a business owner will say, well, I just need an installer. I just need a, no, actually they say, I need a journeyman. I need a journey person to come in and they'll solve all my problems.
Yeah.
Incorrect. You need to know what problem you're trying to solve. If you yourself would take away one of the calls, would you rather take away opportunity calls, demand calls, or service tech calls? Depending on the calls that you're trying to give away, that is the position you should be hiring for. So bare minimum is know what calls you're trying to shift, and that will tell you who you're trying to hire.
I love that. So I'm going to add in there and go then and say, if you have a team already and you find that it's filled with generalists and you're wondering about the potential opportunity from specialist training and splitting people up a bit more, getting a bit more organized and exploring these strengths, that would be my activity for you, is really looking at the KPI. Who is selling more and why? What kind of calls do you find you're giving preference to certain people and why? And getting to know what your people want, what they see in their future and why. Because that staff journey management really can't be undermined, man. It can't be underestimated. Giving people what they want in the realization of everything you want is, in my opinion, the greatest key and the greatest lever to success. As we say, your greatest success will come through the leverage of others. So I hope that helps, guys. Episode 114 done. Stamp it. Electropreneur Secrets, the Electricians Podcast, where we help you guys master sales, simplify pricing, and deliver premium level electrical service. Thanks for joining. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Take care.